Welcome to Villains with Vaughn, Episode 2. Villains with Vaughn is a true crime podcast dedicated to shining light on some would-be villains that might otherwise escape the public eye. Cases that are strange and abnormal, and even discussing local cases that are small but not forgotten. Today's case is that of John Lindsay Wilson, a former police officer in Saskatchewan, Canada, whose story is anything but normal. The trust of the innocent is a liar's most useful tool. Stephen King. John Lindsay, Jack, Wilson's penchant for lies both big and small mapped the course of his life. His charisma and facade infected the lives of others. Sometimes, though, an infection has deadly consequences. John was the second son of a successful grocer, married to the innocent Mary Polly Hutchinson, and co-owner of a greenhouse business in small-town Scotland. It seemed like an idyllic life. When his parents passed, they left their business to their eldest son, Alex. John's brother didn't care for the business and quickly ran it into the ground. John tried to save it, stooping as low as to steal from his brother-in-law to pay off debts. In the end, it did no good, and the bank foreclosed. With the Wilson name in ruins, John allowed himself to be lured in by the advertisements drawing immigrants to the Canadian prairies. Leaving his wife, son, and siblings behind, John sailed to Canada in July of 1912. On his journey from Scotland to his final stop in Saskatchewan, he wrote plenty of letters home. When he secured a job, he sent money as well. He now had a wife and 2 children to support. John worked in Saskatoon until failing wages and rising cost of living prompted his move to Prince Albert, 90 miles northeast of the city. At this point, he barely wrote to Polly, and his siblings hadn't heard from him in over a year. He tried to enlist as soon as war was declared, but the military rejected him due to his weak lungs. This, however, allowed him to apply to the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. They accepted him, and he underwent rigorous training. In July 1915, John was deployed to Blaine Lake. This was where he met the Pattersons, specifically their beautiful 16-year-old daughter, Jessie. She and the rest of the family were a bright spot in John's life and the beginning of a new chapter. It had now been more than 4 years since John arrived in Canada. He no longer wrote to his wife, couldn't afford to bring his family over, and feeling he had done all he could, moved on with his life. John began seeing Jessie and told anyone who would listen that his wife was dead. As 1917 wore on, John's health declined rapidly. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis and subsequently discharged from the RNWMP. With no family, no money, and only a tent to quarantine himself in, John relied heavily on the kindness of the Pattersons. Jessie's care got him through the winter. During that time, John told Jessie about his wife, who wasn't actually dead. He told her Polly was horrible and manipulative, and due to her lack of morals, was divorcing him. It was at this point that he asked Jessie to marry him, to which she said yes. John continued to lie to Jessie via forged letters from his sister Mary, and more letters stating Mary had now died, and Polly was a terrible person. His foundation was not a sturdy one, but John was building his new life in Blaine Lake. In April 1918, John's life was about to take yet another turn. While he was in Prince Albert looking to apply to an overseas cavalry unit, the man he was speaking with, Superintendent Walton Rutledge, received a phone call. The call was from the last person John expected to hear from, his wife. Polly, having come to Canada in search of John, was in Regina. Panicked to hear from her, he tells her to take a train to Saskatoon and he would meet her there. Knowing he would need to keep her far away from Prince Albert to avoid the scandal of people learning the truth, John tells her they would be returning to Regina upon their return. In Regina, they rented a room at a boarding house. It wasn't long until Polly was pregnant with their third child. Playing the loving husband, John applied to the Canadian Military Police. He was still writing love letters to Jessie, even after telling Polly who the other woman was. Of course, his version of events was watered-down half-truths, but it did allow him to keep Polly's love, even after she found one of Jessie's letters in his pocket. However, as he continued to nurture his relationship with Jessie, he began ignoring Polly more and more. Through the summer, John wrote Jessie often. His letters piled on more and more lies. He told her a previously dead sibling was actually alive. He constantly changed his plans, and he promised one thing after another before inevitably changing his mind. During this time, he also began drinking more and more. In mid-September 1918, John moved back to Saskatoon, leaving Polly behind in Regina. Stress and fear made his drinking more of a problem, but despite this, he was now able to see Jessie more. It wasn't long until he told Jessie he was going to get their marriage license. The same evening, he wrote to Polly, asking her to come to Saskatoon. She could leave their trunks in Regina until they got settled. While waiting to meet Polly, John indeed bought a marriage license for himself and Jessie Patterson. When Polly arrives in the city, John takes her on a drive out into the country, claiming to have work that just couldn't wait. As he drives, he keeps drinking from a flask of whiskey. On their drive, John stops the car to shoot a rabbit. He retrieves the animal and tosses it into the back seat next to his shovel, while giving Polly the rifle to hold. Some time later, John announces that it's too late to do his work, and they are going to Blaine Lake. They could talk to Jessie together and clear the air while they were there. He pulls off the road onto a rough, bumpy trail. Claiming that he sees geese, he stops the car and retrieves his gun from Polly. Getting out, he shoots a bird and walks off to retrieve it. Polly follows. Soon, John says it's too far out and it's getting dark and cold, so they return to the car. John puts on his coat while Polly sits down on the passenger seat. Standing next to the car, he lifts his shotgun, the barrel's just inches from Polly's face. John's mess of lies was about to get much worse. It is now September 27th, 1918. John Wilson pulled the trigger, shooting and killing his wife and his unborn son. Only John Wilson truly knew what went on that night, but there was some thought put into how he hid Polly's body. Taking his shovel from the back seat, he proceeded to dig a hole beneath the nearby culvert. He took hours diffing out the dirt and leaving the top layer of grass undisturbed. Shortly before dawn, he left Polly's body in the pit and got back onto the road to Blaine Lake. As he drove out, one of his front wheels caught in the soft dirt, and he careened into the ditch. John's mountain of lies was already precarious, and yet, the morning after the murder, he chose to add more on top. Stumbling up to a nearby farmhouse, dirty, wide-eyed, and stopping briefly to be sick, John meets Isaac Neufeld. The man asks John if he needs help, and this is where John's cover-up began. Claiming he had been chasing down army deserters, he was driving when a fire started in the back seat. He saw a slough and drove to it, assuming he would find water to put the fire out. He went over the grade, and his wheel broke. Being a short walk back to the culvert, Isaac went with John to see the wreckage. The car was completely burnt out, and a shovel, shotgun, and straw suitcase sat beside it. John took the shovel and began shoveling dirt onto the tires of the car. While the pair discussed the accident, a group of men arrived, curious to find out about what was going on. As John explained, his story changed from what he previously told Isaac. John also explained away the gun and the blood on the suitcase by saying he had been hunting geese. Later that day, Wilson got a ride into Blaine Lake with John Neufeld and his kids, who commented on the blood on the suitcase. Wilson gave John $10 and the shovel as payment when he was dropped off at the hotel. When he was cleaned up and presentable again, John went straight to the Pattersons. September 29th, 1918. 2 days after brutally murdering his wife and unborn child, John Wilson married Jesse Patterson. His lies continue. John tells those who knew Polly that after a car accident, she fell very ill. He even poses as Polly in a telegram to perpetuate his lies. He is able to keep up the story when the Spanish flu epidemic reached Saskatoon, sending letters to her friends and family saying how sick she really was. John and Jesse fled to Prince Albert to avoid the epidemic, but it soon caught up with them. John spent the remainder of 1918 playing a losing game, though he didn't know it at the time. His lies about Polly, his double life, drinking, financial woes, and bouts of life-threatening illness were all catching up with him. In January 1919, John rejoined the RNWMP, listing his next of kin as Polly Wilson. After 3 weeks in Regina, John and Jesse moved to Baltimore, Alberta. They left behind a few things, including John's shotgun. In February, John's request to be transferred to Vancouver was granted. Things started well for John and Jesse there. The climate agreed with John, and he grew much healthier. But the good life didn't last long. John took on undercover work, which he excelled at, but his drinking worsened. His mood grew unpredictable, and Jesse was becoming increasingly unhappy. The seeds of doubt and mistrust of John Wilson were becoming too much for those left behind in Scotland and Saskatchewan to ignore. Polly's sister Elizabeth wrote a letter to Superintendent Routledge in Prince Albert asking him to look into her sister's whereabouts. She relayed her suspicions, the strange messages from John, his requests for money, and his penchant for lying. Routledge, now assistant commissioner, made inquiries about John's wife at the Vancouver detachment. They reported back that his wife lived with him, and he, in turn, relayed this back to Elizabeth. They did not know the wife in question was not Polly. Ecstatic about the news, Elizabeth wrote a long letter to her sister and one to Superintendent Horrigan of the Vancouver detachment, including a photo of Polly. This photo was inevitably seen by someone who knew John and Jesse. News of the photo eventually got back to John. After months of no news and never receiving a reply to her letter, Elizabeth wrote increasingly distraught letters to Commissioner Perry. Perry had also heard from Horrigan, who asked that Wilson be transferred back to Prince Albert. They had no specific charges for him, but his conduct was poor and his actions ill-perceived. Perry said Wilson would be sent to Regina for questioning. John and Jesse were on a train to Regina by October 23, 1919, while the RNWMP began making inquiries about the identity of Wilson's wife and the whereabouts of Polly. Aline Weismer, Polly's good friend from her stay in Regina, was interviewed, and she provided a letter from Polly's family. The same day, Polly's abandoned trunks were found and searched. They contained an RNWMP uniform with corporals' chevrons and photos of the children. All of this was forwarded to Commissioner Perry. Sergeant Darling, one of the investigators working the case at the time, confirmed that John Wilson's current wife was not who she ought to be. Officers were soon out in force, speaking to everyone they could and gathering as much information as possible. The desk clerk at the New Windsor Hotel in Saskatoon confirmed the identity of Wilson's current wife as Patterson's daughter. An interview with the general store owner of Blaine Lake uncovered the story that Polly died in a car accident shortly before John married Jesse. A former underling of John confirmed the wedding, Wilson's drinking problem, and his poor health. While the investigation was in full swing, to keep up appearances, the RNWMP sent John back to Vancouver to testify in trials of cases that he had been involved in. More interviews were conducted, including the dealer who sold Wilson his car and towed the wreckage. He described the wreck, the approximate location of the accident, and the date it occurred. One of the men who helped haul the car back to Saskatoon confirmed what the dealer said while providing the exact location of the culvert. Each person the Mountie spoke with confirmed Wilson's drinking, his marriage to Jesse, and his accident. One person in particular suggested they speak with Wilson's close friend and co-worker, Sergeant Conrad Redd. At this time, the Mounties were convinced John had murdered Polly, burying her somewhere near the wreckage. They checked the area previously, but no one thought to look beneath the culvert because the surface grass had not been disturbed. On November 10, 1919, John arrived back in Regina. Upon arrival at headquarters, he was brought up on charges due to complaints from poorly handled witnesses in his undercover work. He was subsequently informed that as of November 7th, he had been dismissed from the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. He was led to the guardroom and directly into questioning regarding the disappearance of Mary Polly Wilson. The interrogation was filled with more lies, delusions, cover-up attempts, and eventually, half confessions. He was left alone in the room to write his statement. Hours later, in the early morning hours, John found a penknife that had fallen into the liner of his jacket from a hole in his pocket. Alone, guilty, and panicked, John used the knife to cut his own throat from ear to ear. Miraculously, he didn't die from the wounds. The 7-inch cut missed all major arteries and vessels, and he was sent to the hospital for surgery. On November 13, 1919, the Saskatoon Daily Star broke the story of suspected murderer and Wilson's charge of attempted suicide. With the case being all anyone could talk about, the provincial police even joined the investigation. Witnesses were re-interviewed, but Polly's body still had not been found. Commissioner Perry received Conrad Redd's statement, which included more damning evidence against Wilson. It included the account of a missing Colt pistol seen in Wilson's possession and revealed what happened to his shotgun. The weapon had been given to Redd, who thoroughly cleaned it before returning it to Wilson. He provided the maker and a description of the weapon, so it could later be tracked down. It also told of the numerous lies that Wilson used to get what he wanted. Trunks were confiscated by the police and searched. Blood evidence, copies of reports submitted by Wilson, military police papers, and love letters between John and Jessie were all found. A second interview with one of the witnesses revealed how Wilson shoveled dirt from under the culvert onto the tires of the car. Wilson was questioned again. This time he admitted to the forged letters and burying Polly, but nothing further. He was informed that Jessie, now a few months pregnant, was very ill with stress. Instead of prompting him to confess fully, the news only made him shut down. He refused to speak until he was able to see her. The SPP and RNWMP hounded Wilson, but he refused to give a proper statement. On December 10th, John received a letter in prison. Fast forward to December 11th, Wilson wanted to make a new statement. Whatever was in the letter from the day prior convinced him to record a full and truthful recounting of events on September 27th and everything thereafter. On December 12th, a team returned to the culvert once more. The frozen ground was dug up, and Polly's body was finally found. She and the site were photographed extensively before the body was turned over to the coroner. The post-mortem was conducted on December 15th, and John Wilson was forced to attend. He was questioned, confirming her identity and the course of events once more. The examination also concluded that Polly Wilson died of gunshot wounds to the head. The murder charge was laid the next day. Things moved quickly afterward. An inquest was conducted, followed by hearings. John had no wish for legal counsel and pleaded not guilty. He was remanded to the Prince Albert jail without bail. As Wilson awaited the trial, he changed his mind about counsel and retained a lawyer. Knowing he could no longer lie his way out of his mess, Wilson decided a plea of insanity was his only hope, and proceeded to behave erratically during all meetings with his lawyer. However, prosecutors provided sworn statements from many sources stating Wilson's rational and sane behavior at all stages of incarceration beforehand. With a massive crowd in a packed courtroom, the trial of Rex versus John Wilson began on February 2, 1920. The Crown presented every scrap of evidence, every letter, receipt, and testimony that they could. Over 2 days, 42 eyewitnesses gave testimonies. On the third day, the defense presented their case. Witnesses included Conrad Redd and others who served with or under John Wilson. Soon enough, Wilson himself was called to the stand. However, putting on his insanity act once more, he started shaking and pointing at the ceiling. He was pulled from the room and the trial went into a short recess. When court resumed that afternoon without Wilson, key witnesses were called back. Eventually, the final arguments were presented. The jury took less than 2 hours to return with their verdict. Wilson was forced back into the courtroom to hear his fate. On the evening of the third day of his trial, John Lindsay "Jack" Wilson was found guilty of the murder of Mary Polly Wilson. He was sentenced to hang by the neck until dead, which was carried out 77 days later on April 23, 1920. In a cruel twist of fate, Jessie Wilson gave birth to a son the same day her husband was executed. This case was pieced together from eyewitness statements, police records, telegrams, and letters found in the National Archives of Canada. For a more personal and emotional retelling, please read The Secret Lives of Sergeant John Wilson by Lois Simmie. We here at Villains with Vaughn want to thank you for listening to our informative content. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and to leave a comment down below letting us know who you'd like us to cover in the future. And of course, please be safe out there.